Welcome to Mastering Life's Adventures, an educational podcast about tapping into your true self, the soul, your soul, the substance of your life, to discover what life's ups and downs are really about, and how to have a greater sense of purpose, peace, joy, and fulfillment. I am Dr. Judith Holder, your host, coach psychologist, fellow seeker who enjoys diving into the connections between spirituality, psychology, wellness, and your everyday life's adventures. All preparing and polishing you like the facets of a magnificent diamond to be your best self. If you're craving more from your life, you are in the right place. Come, let's journey together and transforming what you know into who you really are. Mastering Life's Adventures begins now. Hi, I'm back with more to talk about another aspect that we thought would be good to have a deep dive around. How can we forgive? Forgiving is sometimes very challenging for people to do, especially if the event that happened or the circumstance that happened or the person has created resentment, anger, and bitterness because of what they did to you or to a significant person in your life. We thought this would be a good area to have a deeper dive in as it relates to this question, because we're doing these deep dives in the form of questions. The question is, how can we forgive with our soul in focus? Mark, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Mark Hicks. I'm an author and speaker and author of the book Learning Love, Building a Life That Matters, and Healthy Relationships That Last. In that book, I teach the 5 components of love that everyone can learn and practice to build the healthy, happy, thriving relationships they want in every area of life, at home, at work, in friendships. The 5 components of love are different manifestations in different places, obviously. We have different relationship with coworkers than we do with our spouse, but the components to build those relationships are the same regardless of the area of life. I want to help people build the kind of relationships they want, and not only want, but need and deserve, even if they've come from a dysfunctional family or had difficulty relationships in the past, because love is a learned skill set. One of the skills we're going to have to learn if we're going to have healthy relationships that last is forgiveness. That's going to be a key, because every relationship is going to have at least some difficulties, maybe big ones. How we deal with the topic of forgiveness is going to be crucial in every relationship.
What do you think makes it harder or easier for some individuals in relationships to forgive?
I think there are a lot of factors that go into it. One is the level of insult or the level of hurt that is brought about. Sometimes we can forgive pretty easy if it hasn't really hurt us that bad. And it's obviously more difficult if it's hurt us a lot. People are wired up different ways. What I may be able to just toss away as they were having a bad day and they didn't really mean that, may deeply hurt someone else. And it may be just feel like it was cutting to them, and they may be deeply hurt by that statement. It's not one size fits all. What hurts us brings us into a place that we are called upon to forgive, not just for their sake, but for our sake. Forgiveness is really about us, because this toxicity, this anger, this bitterness, you may have good reason for it. People sometimes resist the idea of forgiveness because they will say, I have good reason to be angry. Look at what they did to me. And I would say, you're absolutely right. You have absolutely good reason to be angry. That's why you need to forgive, because that anger can become corrosive. It becomes toxic and it hurts us. It's not just about letting them off the hook. That's not the point. The point is about how do we heal from that hurt, and forgiveness is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, and I think what we miss sometimes, and what you just said, which is great, is that it hurts us very deeply because the soul gets put away and cannot be connect with his creator because of the
Mhm.
hurt, the bitterness, the pain. That becomes in between where the soul and where the soul wants to go in terms of that connection with the higher self, the creator, the Atman, the I am presence, whatever you want to use. It becomes really, really challenging now because you're holding on to this boatload of anger
Yeah.
and resentment and frustration and feeling justified on your particular type of situation that's happened to you. But forgiveness is really about letting go
allowing God's energy to come in to help heal the situation and heal you. There's a statement as a cosmic law that exists that there's two things that tie us to an individual. One is love, and the other is hate, evil, anger, frustration. And so, why we want to be tied to, and it's this particular person that we have anger, bitterness, and hurt to. Better to let them go, be who they need to be, so that you can be the greater self of who you need to be.
Absolutely true. And I would emphasize that when we talk about letting go, we are talking about not seeking revenge or seeking to harm that person in real life and in your imagination. A lot of people who are spiritual people, religious people, or just people that consider themselves good are not going to go out and physically harm somebody, even if they feel like that person deserves it. We may feel that anger and we would just like to put our hands around their throat and squeeze, but we don't do that because it's illegal. We don't want those consequences. And if we're a good person, we don't want to do that. The problem is we do it in our imagination. We think about what we would do to them, what we would say to them, how we would get even with them, how we would just tear them apart in a conversation, the arguments we would make and the things we would do to them and the revenge. The problem with that on an emotional level, on a brain level, our brains don't distinguish a lot between actually physically harming somebody out of revenge or thinking about that over and over again of what you would like to do to them. Our brains don't really make a huge distinction. We're living that out. Even though it's in our imaginations, our bodies, our minds, our emotions are living that out. And so it's like you are physically hurting that person over and over and over again. And just think how toxic that would be if you did do that physically. If you went to that person day after day so that you could harm them and hurt them and physically lash out on them and do them great harm, what would that do to your soul? What would that do to you as a person? When you imagine the harm you can do to that person day after day, you're doing similar harm to yourself, to your soul, to your spirit, to your personhood. We don't really have the ability to draw a great distinction between those two. So forgiveness is not just choosing to not seek a revenge on a person in real life. It is also choosing to not seek that revenge in our imaginations. When we talk about letting go, it's important to address both.
That is true, because it is, especially for people that are more spiritually minded and want to be perceived as being more spiritually minded, they can have torrential rains of negative thoughts and feelings swarming around in their minds, but they're realizing God sees all. God sees that too going on in your mind. And so it's not only have a physical effect, but it also has a disconnecting effect. That disconnect is your higher self, your I am presence, your soul self. And so we have to realize that you can either, through lack of forgiveness, get into rigidity about the situation because you feel justified, or you can go the higher road, which is flexibility, knowing that due the flexibility of the situation that, you know what, this did happen to me. I don't like it. I don't appreciate it happening to me. But I know that because I am tied to something greater than myself, I can get through this. I can heal from this. I can call upon God's presence to be with me. The angels, archangels, the masters you feel you're close to, you can call for them to step in, to guide, help you, and also to be aware that there's something I can get from this experience.
Yeah.
As small as it may be, or as great as it may be.
Yeah, in another episode, we did a deep dive into grief and how that affects us and how we can, grief as a healer. I would bring that same understanding into the topic of forgiveness, because when we are hurt, instead of lashing out, instead of seeking revenge, either in real life or our imagination, we can heal from that hurt. And that's a grief process as well. It's not just when someone dies or when we lose a job, but if someone has done something to offend us, someone has done something to hurt us in some way that we are called upon to forgive, there can still be a grief process. Forgiveness is not about picking yourself up by your bootstraps and gritting your teeth and saying, I'm not going to harm you, I'm going to forgive you. It's about grieving that hurt so that we can heal from that, recognizing that this has hurt us. Even acknowledging, we can tell that person that this has hurt us. But instead of seeking revenge for it, we grieve that loss, that element of pain that's been brought into our life. We can grieve that, heal from that. And that keeps us from having to feel that compulsion to get even, because we're never going to get even. Instead, we grieve that, we heal from that, and allow that person to be who they are. And that might mean that we don't have a relationship with them. That I think that's really important to distinguish that these are two different conversations. Forgiveness is not seeking revenge. A separate conversation is, do I continue a relationship with this person? Can we reconcile? If we can, that's a beautiful thing. But we are not called to be abused. We are not called to be someone's emotional punching bag. There is a place that we can set boundaries. This is not defensiveness. This is not anger. This is boundaries. And boundaries is saying, I'm going to live here in this healthy place, and I would love for you to live here with me in this healthy relationship. If you choose to be an abusive person, you're choosing to live outside of that relationship with me, because I'm right here with God, my friends and family that want to live in healthy relationships. That doesn't mean perfect. That means healthy. And if you're choosing to be an abuser, you're making the choice. So we're not kicking people out of our life in unforgiveness. We are acknowledging they're choosing to live a different life. That hurts us. They get to make that choice. People have the right to be wrong. God gives us free will. And so if they're choosing to live outside our healthy realm, that's their choice. We didn't kick them out. And if they choose to get help, perhaps we can let them back into our healthy realm. That reconciliation may happen at a different time. But reconciliation is not required with forgiveness. What's required with forgiveness is not seeking revenge, either in reality or our imagination. Boundaries allows us to say, we may not have a relationship with that person due to their choice to live that toxic life.
One of the things that came to my mind was when you talk about abuse, I also think about rape, for example. Going a little bit deeper here, when rape, which feels of such of injustice that's occurred and such a violation that's occurred, through that rape, or a violent crime that has happened to a person. It's the same process, or would it be a little bit different in terms of dealing with forgiving?
Yeah, I think one of the distinctions we have to make there is that forgiveness can still allow for a person to experience their own consequences. And so I think there's a question of, would we press charges if we're forgiving somebody? Yes. If they have legal consequences due to this violent act, that is a consequence of their actions. We're not called upon to save them from their own consequences. We're called upon to not inflict revenge upon them. So we don't harm them, and we don't dream of ways we could harm them. If they have to stand before the legal system and experience consequences for that action, that is their responsibility. We're not inflicting that on them. Forgiveness doesn't save them from the consequences of their crime. It means that we are letting go so that we can heal, and we don't feel that urge to hurt them, to harm them. But if they have to pay the price for their crime, that is their consequences. And it's similar to boundaries, that they are making that choice to do those things, and they have to experience those consequences. We're not called to rescue them.
I think that's such a good point, because sometimes people say, because I'm a Christian or a Catholic or Buddhist, that I should be able to just let it go. But at the same time, they did behavior that is not right. And so we do have a right to be able to say, police, arrest them.
And you're saving other people in that process. If you take a view that if I'm a forgiving person, I'm a spiritual person, I'm a Christian, and so I'm not even going to report them, I'm just going to forgive them and let them go their happy way, they are going to commit that crime on someone else. And so we have a responsibility to protect others as best we can. And as I say that, I want to back off of that a bit, because I know that sometimes that can be a very difficult process, particularly in the example you used of rape. Coming forward can be dangerous in some cases. Allow me to back off of that statement of responsibility. I want to take that back, because everybody has to make their choices in their situation. But we do have to understand that they could commit that crime to someone else. You are not inflicting harm on that person by reporting them, by calling the police. You are protecting others by doing so.
And sometimes you have to consult the police, a counselor, a minister, or other individuals. It gives you a better sense of what you want to do in terms of that is right for you. The key thing is that when these types of horrific situations happen to us, they plague us. We tend to start moving towards that bitterness zone that we don't want to do. So better to consult, get all the information, see what you want to do in these situations, and proceed accordingly. You may have a timeline that you don't have to do anything immediately because you're still trying to kind of get your wits end about what that's just happened. And it's really, you're going through a fear reaction and uncertainty. And those are all natural courses that happen when we have something violently happen to us.
Yeah.
But we also are asking you to be aware of the fact that God is here too to help. And that we sometimes, when
Absolutely.
these horrific situations happen, we tend to push God away and say, why did you allow this to happen to me? We have free will. They have free will in terms of the people who do these types of acts. And God says to call upon me. But if you don't call me, this is your sphere. This is your game that you're playing or you're involved with in terms of the school of life. And I don't think God wants anything negative to happen to us. But when it does, how often do we pray to ask God to help us heal, help us grow, help our soul to be able to move forward in the midst of the darkness that we find ourselves in?
I think we can wrap what you said about God and prayer into that consultation. We consult with God, police, counselors, ministers, friends. Secrets tend to enhance the problem. If we are facing these difficult situations and we're facing these hardships and tragedies, and somehow we want to retreat and keep that to ourselves, that can be a natural thought, especially if it has been a violent crime. You brought up the topic of rape. That's going to be excruciating to talk about. And there's a tendency to say that I'm just going to keep this to myself. I'll forgive them, let this go. They don't have to pay any consequences, and I'll just try to heal from this myself. Keeping that a secret is just like throwing acid on a wound. It is going to enhance the problem. Secrets are just deadly. Now, confidentiality is a different matter. Obviously, in some situations, we keep some things confidential. Confidentiality and secrets are different. When someone has inflicted that kind of pain on you, committed a crime against you, done something to harm you, they do not have confidentiality. Confidentiality doesn't cover that. What you're talking about then is just keeping their secret. If a person is abusing you, if you're in a toxic relationship, do not keep that a secret. Talk to someone about that. Secrets are always deadly. They are a corrosive element that will just make the wound worse. You're not going to be able to heal when you're keeping that a secret yourself. You have to consult God, consult ministers, consult counselors, consult the police in the proper situation. Talk to friends, talk to family. Do not keep secrets.
Secrets actually suffocate the soul.
Yes.
And in the process of thinking that you're just going to move on, in reality, when the soul becomes suffocating, it starts to die. It starts to wither.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to get disconnected. It starts to hibernate.
Yeah.
Because it's too much weight that is placed upon the soul. And one of the things we want is to be able to protect our soul. And therefore, that's why we don't want to have secrets. We do want to consult. We do, so from people that we feel close to, who can give us great awareness about the situation and guidance in the situation, be it a minister or a counselor or a coach or whoever it may be. We do want to do this, or in a group if you want to do that.
Yeah.
But to keep secrets, it's not helping your soul's evolution.
It does disconnect us. When we retreat and keep that secret, it disconnects our soul. It disconnects us as a person from the help we need. And when we have that kind of disconnection, we're just creating our own prison around that event that happened to us. We're cutting ourselves off from the healing that we could have. And those secrets, like I said, they are corrosive. They just eat away at us. They stifle our soul, and it keeps us from that grief process. One of the worst things I think that can be said on the topic of forgiveness, it's one of the worst phrases we ever use, is forgive and forget. That is not possible. Our brains are wired up to remember traumatic events, hurtful events, because it wants to keep us from repeating them. Happy events we can forget because the brain's not worried about that. If we repeat that, fine. But if we have a traumatic event, our brain does not want that to happen again, and it is wired up to remember that. We literally cannot forget it unless we have a brain injury or dementia or something of that nature that literally changes our brain. Otherwise, we cannot forget that. It is going to be wired into our memory. And so when we cut ourselves off, we are living with that. The pain of that tends to grow. When we talk about it, we're not forgetting it, we're processing it. When we consult, particularly with professionals, we are processing it. So we're not just trying to stifle it, which is impossible. We're allowing our brains to process that so the brain can let it go. The brain has a way of letting something go, putting that in the past once it's been processed and we have an understanding of it and a healing from it. That's when the brain can let it go. If you want to forgive and forget, the closest you can come to that is consulting with others, getting some help, and processing that.
When you talked about processing, it reminds me of EMDR, which is desensitization reprocessing, and which allows you to take that particular event or situation that has happened and through the technique that they utilize to have it fully dissolve and remove itself from your immediate awareness. And so you can look at it like a movie. Slides or pictures are going by, but you're not attached to it. And so that's what we are wanting, is that you're aware of it, but you're no longer attached emotionally to the particular situation that has happened to you or the circumstance or the person that has happened. So there are resources available that can be of help. And if it's not EMDR, there's also EFT, which is emotional freedom technique. And people use. Ultimately, we get stuck in our lack of forgiveness or difficulty with forgiveness in this emotional pain or hurt or disappointment. So they're all techniques and tools that are out there that can be of value to individuals to help them to move forward, along with the minister, the pastor, or their counselor, or therapist, or coach, or whoever individuals or group type of format that you're looking at. But what would make it easier in relationships when we're talking about forgiveness? Sometimes the resentment or the lack of forgiveness between partners can be pretty profound and last a long time. They're still together, but they haven't forgotten what you did to me and how you hurt me and how you continue to hurt me.
Yeah, I've told the story on different occasions of a couple in their 70s. I met them. We were introducing ourselves. And they asked me what I did. And I said, I was a writer. She said, well, what do you write? I said, I've got a book on love and relationships. And she said, oh, and rolled her eyes and changed the subject with her husband standing beside her. And I was like, there's probably issues there. They were together, but there's probably issues when somebody has that kind of reaction to just the words of a book of love and relationships. And yeah, it can take a toll. It can just eat away at you. And it doesn't have to be some big dramatic event like an affair or something like that. It can be small things over the years, just little hurts, things that were said that weren't really addressed. That's why it's so important not to keep secrets, to talk about things, to process things, to grieve when you are hurt. These professional treatments that you're talking about are so valuable. And that's why I always recommend, if at all possible, get professional help when you're struggling. Yes, it's great to talk to friends. I don't want to dismiss that, or a family member that is caring for you, or a minister. Certainly talk to them. But there are professional, scientific, psychological processes that we can go through in counseling that are proven to help, that your friend's just not going to know. They're caring, they love you, they're there for you, and it's good to talk about it. But there are real professional treatments. Don't dismiss psychology and counseling as something you see on television. There are real professional treatments, and I think that's important to understand. We don't have to drift off into that aging couple that just gets through life until death do us part. We can be happy, healthy, and thriving in our relationships, but there is a skill set to it. And forgiveness is one of those skill sets. How do we process these things when we've been hurt? How do we talk about them? How do we communicate? And how do we get help when we really have been hurt, to understand where boundaries are? How do we address this and grieve these hurts of life, to stay engaged? That's the connection that we need to have that healthy relationship, is to stay engaged in it, be happy in that relationship, not just living out a commitment. I'm not opposed to commitment. Sometimes that gets us through. We do need commitment in relationships. But is that really what we're looking for, is just to tough it out because we're committed and loyal? No, we want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to be thriving together. And this topic of forgiveness, how do we forgive things, big and small, the big stuff, is absolutely crucial to growing old together happily in a healthy way, thriving together, glad we're together and having fun together.
Yeah. And for couples, you said something earlier, which is communication. It's not just communication to the light times and the happy times, but it's when something has happened and it's hurt you, but you never tell your partner that it bothered you or it hurt you. And instead, you just build up this resentment towards your partner, but they can't mind read. And you start stonewalling, as Gottman would say in his research, couples research. You start stonewalling and start to make comments, sarcastic comments, and the partner may not even know where that's coming from, because you've decided not to forgive them for what they said. In fact, they don't even know it was bothersome to you. So communication becomes really important, and to help couples break down the barrier. But each partner has to agree to say, I need to find ways to communicate what's on my mind. And if I need help to do that, okay, that's when you can use other resources to help you. But that's one of the fundamental things, because ultimately being able to forgive means that you're also willing to listen to your inner self. And if you have that connection with your soul self and you trust that intuition or part of you is trying to say to you and is telling you, you need to go and let the person know, you say, no, I'm not going to do it. That's called rebellion. You're rebelling against your inner voice. Your soul self becomes lesser and lesser. There is the opposite side of that rebellion is obedience. Being obedient to your own inner self and your own inner promptings, and testing and experimenting it and seeing where it leads you, because that develops a greater strengthening of your connection to your soul, spiritual, Christ, creator self. If you're walking a spiritual path, you always want to be on, not decoying off because of a lack of forgiveness or bitterness or hurt or disappointment. That's not on the spiritual path. That's not on God's path.
And that's what builds that kind of connection when we are on that spiritual path with the people in our life, and we're connecting on that spiritual level, a deep emotional level beyond just the day-to-day. It's so important to understand that we do have to listen to that voice, to not rebel against it because we're afraid, or that we've bought into certain things like, well, if they love me, they would just know. Where did we get that idea? Where did that come from? It's so prominent to have those kinds of things. And I think those are just temptations. These are a way of justifying getting out of doing what we know is right by communicating, dealing with issues within relationships. We might say something like, I don't want to bring it up because it's just going to cause a huge fight. If you are scared within a relationship to bring up something small because you're afraid it's going to explode into something big, that is one sign you may be in a toxic relationship. And again, don't keep that a secret. Talk to people about that. Maybe you just need a better communication skills, but there could be something more going on. If you're truly scared to bring up a small issue and say, hey, that really didn't sit well with me, and you're afraid that's going to blow up on you, that's a bad sign in a relationship. You need to get help for that. Ask yourself, why am I not bringing this up? Why am I not communicating with my partner? Look at the reasons. Do you have this false belief of he should be a mind reader or she should be a mind reader? Or do you have a fear that's there because you may be living in a toxic relationship, or maybe you just don't know how to communicate? If you were raised in a dysfunctional family, you probably never learned it, but it's a skill like any other. Feels weird at first, feels a little awkward, but you can learn it like any other. And again, get help for that. There's people out there that can teach you how.
Definitely, definitely. And I think sometimes in relationships, each partner has to really observe themselves and look at what they're contributing, positive, the good, the bad, and not so great to the relationship. Be willing to work on those things that you can see is your Achilles heel, that you can see that is hindering you. Because some people will say, well, I just don't like conflict. Well, that's an Achilles heel. You have to learn how to deal with conflict, because I don't know too many relationships in terms of intimate relationships don't have differences of opinion that will take place. And needing to be self-aware that a difference of opinion doesn't have to lead to conflict necessarily. It's just a difference of opinion. And how do you express your viewpoints that allows the other person to understand where you're coming from and not hold on to this lack of forgiveness, this kind of bitterness and saying, well, I'm not going to share with them what I think because, they hurt me. You end up getting into that stonewalling and the person's pursuing you to figure out what's the matter. You should be the first person to say, I need to work on this. I need to change this because I want a healthy relationship, as you talked about here in our first episode in the series and the deep dive that we're taking and Mastering Life's Adventures, that we have some responsibility that we have to be able to understand what is forgiveness mean to me? What does it mean to my soul? How does it manifest in my world? And how do I see myself doing more of it?
Communication does not have to lead to conflict. I don't know how we equate those two. Communication is not conflict. Communication is restoring relationships. It's overcoming conflict. It's dealing with issues. But somehow we've gotten the idea, because of bad experiences in our past, that communication leads to conflict. So we need to avoid communication. That's not going to help matters. The idea that we equate those two is just a misconception. Communication is the way to overcome conflict. Just because you're not communicating doesn't mean you're not having conflict. There's probably those jabs and the distance, those feelings of resentment that come out in our home life or at work. It's going to get communicated some way. When we choose to communicate it with our words in a healthy way, then we are actually overcoming conflict. We're not creating it.
What do you think about as our last comment here before winding down? It relates to some individuals want to pursue and they do want to communicate, but other people avoid or they try not to communicate at all, which keeps this interesting dance. And one person wants to and the other person doesn't. So they're at a stalemate. Thoughts about that?
I love the word you use there. I think that's the solution. It's a dance. Just like dancing with a new partner that may come from a different style of dance, it's going to be awkward. If you have someone that's very skilled in, say, formal dance and ballet, and you put them with a square dancer, that's going to be a little awkward. They can both dance. They both have their own style. They may be very skilled at what they do, but dancing in a partnership is going to be really awkward. But they can learn it. They can get coaching and help. In this illustration, go to a dance instructor. Learn how to do that dance of, okay, I dance this way, but you dance that way. How are we going to make this work? Communication's the same way. We all have our communication style, and it works for us. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not going to criticize someone who's very talkative. We're not going to criticize someone who's very quiet. It's fine to be either one. That's who you are. But if you want to have a good relationship, we have to learn how to communicate together. A counselor can help with this. Finding those ways that we bring our different styles together to do that dance that works for us. It takes a while. It's awkward. It's clumsy. It doesn't always work at first. Get help, get instruction. And once you get it, it's just like dancing. It becomes beautiful. It becomes a flow. It becomes something we can enjoy. It just takes a while to get there. It's a learned skill set.
Yeah, and as you talk about qualities of patience, how can we be patient with each other?
Yeah.
Especially if each person in that relationship is willing to say, okay, I can work on this. And let's figure out how we get this dancing going with each other.
It does take a while, and it does take patience. But if you're in a permanent relationship, with a spouse particularly, or family, but even in friendships, if you have an ambition that this relationship is going to last, so what if it takes a year to learn a new skill set? And it's awkward for a long time, and you have to go to counseling and figure out how to do this communication thing that you're just not very good at. If you have to invest a year of time and you have 20, 30, 50 years ahead of you to enjoy that relationship, that's nothing. But we get so caught up in, well, my goodness, we've been doing this for a month and we haven't made that much progress. You're talking about a lifetime process. This is what we want, joy for a lifetime, long-term, healthy, happy, thriving relationships. And so invest the time. It's worth it, even if it takes a while.
Yeah, and the investment of the time that you take to do those things, which is developing your skill set, it helps our soul develop its skill set too, and helps us to navigate situations in a more helpful and healthy way. that moves the soul forward as you're moving your skill set forward as well. And it also moves you into the clear hearing of the soul guiding you about what you need to say, how you need to say it to the particular person, be it in an intimate relationship or a friendship or a work relationship. And therefore, it also helps you to let go of slights or hurts or disappointments that happen to you because you're always in connection to your soul. And what your soul is guiding you through the Christ, through the Atman, through the I Am Presence, is always guiding you, trying to help you as you're moving forward. So then forgiveness becomes a cinch.
Exactly. It becomes easy once we put in that work, if we can communicate, because just as you're saying, the soul is a higher level. These nuts and bolts of how do we say things, how do we take that deep breath, how do we go to a counselor and put in that work, all these things are parts of the system. We're going to find that there is a soul nurturing that takes place in those nuts and bolts, that everyday work that's unexplainable. It's a higher level. And that kind of connection, when we have that soul connection with someone of just what we call love, forgiveness becomes very easy at that point. It takes doing the nitty-gritty work every day of learning these skills in order to get to that place. It becomes easy when we're talking about a relationship that we value, someone we want a relationship with, and we want it to last and be happy. Put in that work, even when it's awkward, even when it's hard, get the help you need. Connect on that soul level, on a level you can't even really explain. Then it's like, why wouldn't you forgive? It becomes almost a foregone conclusion because I love this person and I have a spiritual, soulful connection with them. Of course, I'm going to forgive them. It's a foregone conclusion.
Very nicely said. And, as we've been having this deeper dive in how you can forgive with one soul in mind, I think what you just said really capsulizes the progress that one can make and that the soul makes in the process because the soul is being nurtured as the skill sets are being learned. But with that in mind, something to think about, listeners and seekers. Until we meet again, we will continue this series with Mark on this deeper dive and looking at how to master life's adventures. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining me for this episode on Mastering Life's Adventures, being your best self through soul evolution. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, I would be delighted if you would share this episode with others, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe to my Mastering Life's Adventures podcast. Look forward to your joining the next episode. Please leave any comments or suggestions you might have below. Bye for now.